Hey everybody, thanks for joining. This is Christy from Mentally Kills here with a little special educational episode for you. I have a special guest today, so I'm going to bring her out. Her name is Cool Gray. How are you today?
Hey, thanks for having me, CA.
Thanks for joining me. Thank you. So I'll let you start by telling everybody why you're here and a little about yourself.
Well, yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. Thanks. Cool Gray is the way I've been known on the internet for the last 7 years or so. I've been making YouTube videos about things like art and cooking for that period of time. My name is Lynn. You can call me Lynn if you like. A lot of people actually do call me Cool Gray. It is the color of my hair. It's also a personal lifestyle choice. In my retirement, I've embraced authentic living, and the ceasing of the hair dyeing was a big part of getting back to who I really feel like I am in the world. So I work as an artist, I work as a podcaster, and I make some YouTube videos.
Love it. I love to hear it. And I love the gray. I'm just
Thank
saying,
you.
I love the color. So it's definitely cool.
Awesome.
I always love hearing people say, like, I'm no longer doing this or masking in some way. This is me. You could take it or leave it.
Right.
This is who I am. And
Right.
I
If you
love
don't
that.
like me, then at least you don't like authentically me and not fake me.
Exactly. At least you're going to give people the proper rendition of hatred. Like who you hate is actually who I am and not just some kind of picture that you made up in your mind of who I am.
Right. And that's okay with me.
Right. So we're going to get into boundaries in a few, but to start, I know you've been doing podcasting for a little while, right?
Yeah, I have actually very recently added that to my little repertoire. I'm kind of the queen of personal reinventing. So it's funny how that juxtaposes with authentic living, but every reinvention has been very authentic. And podcasting I added because when I was working on art projects, I found myself listening to a lot of podcasts and taking in a lot of information. And just because of the way I'm wired, I needed to do something with all that stuff that was now held inside my brain. And I wanted to talk to some of the people that I had met via podcasts. And the way to do that was to start my own, because I found that if you just reach out to somebody and say, I'd like to have a conversation with you, that doesn't always yield the result you're looking for. But if you ask somebody to be interviewed on your podcast, they're a lot more likely to engage in conversation. So that's working for me. I'm having the discussions that I want to have with the people I want to talk to. And I think that comes across, probably does for you too, and makes for good listening.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've met a lot of amazing people when I started podcasting and I'd say like late May, early June when I really started getting into it because I had never listened to a podcast a day in my life before then. So yeah, I actually really had. I listen to audiobooks. So that was kind of my thing. And then I was like, well, this is kind of like the same thing, but these are real life renditions and real life recounts and stories and opinions. And I was like, this is kind of like more fun to listen to than, books that I've already read myself just in audio form. So
right,
it's definitely educational. And I definitely have more fun listening to it this way. So
yeah, I found the same thing. Audiobooks were the other thing that I was listening to at the same time. And part of what made me, I would read some or listen to a very interesting audiobook about a topic and say, I need to look that person in the eye and have them tell that to me face to face. And podcasting is a way to do that.
Right. That's very true. And podcasting gives another way to see other people's perspectives, which I love because it kind of gives you different ways of looking at things that you may not have before. So
exercise your brain.
That's right. That's right. And since I'm not exercising my body, I got to exercise something. Okay. It's cold outside. We don't exercise.
I feel you, girl.
I don't leave my house. Like I am a hermit until the sun comes back out fully. So I don't do
Along with the gray hair came permission to just sit down.
Absolutely. And you know what? My hair's blonde, but I'm still sitting down.
We'll sit together for a while. How's that?
I love it. I'm with it. So when it comes to, making your podcast and kind of moving towards doing these YouTube videos, did you do that as a way to kind of send a message out of any kind or just kind of something to give you something to do as an outlet or just, for just because like what was the reasoning?
Both projects. I started the YouTube channel about 7 years ago. And then I just started podcasting this year. And both of those things happened out of a very strong urge that I wasn't quite sure I understood, that I needed to express myself in this way.
Right.
Uh, it was actually a therapist that I have that pointed out to me that both of those things started right on the heels of a personal trauma in my life. And she was the one that suggested to me that this form of creative outlet was actually a trauma response. And it was my way of coping with what was going on in my personal circumstances. The videos and the podcast episodes don't necessarily have to do directly with those things that I was traumatized by, but it was a way for me to process through. I didn't realize that until it was pointed out to me. And when it was pointed out, it immediately made sense. So I'm embracing that. But at the same time, the message that comes through both in the videos and in the podcast is I'm trying to inspire people to think more deeply about things that maybe we form our opinions on just by doom scrolling on social media or reading the first paragraph of an article. Hey, why don't you spend an hour with me and think a little more deeply? Or why don't you feel inspired by what you've just heard and go and do something creative yourself? So I do have a very strong desire to encourage others, particularly in the area of exercising the brain and creative expression.
And I think I'm freezing.
You're muted. There you go.
Okay, yeah, it kind of freezes up a little bit. Sorry about that. I love that. I love that you use it as a form of educational way to just get the word out there for anybody who wants to hear it. And I kind of used it the same way, especially when it came to mental health stuff, because it was like a form of therapy for me, to talk about the things and see that there are people out there who want to listen to me and that have maybe the same views or maybe don't have the same views, but still want to hear what I have to say. So it's very therapeutic and it's very empowering, when it
Absolutely,
comes
it
to just
is.
owning
Yeah.
your truth. So
Yeah, and I want to congratulate you actually for choosing to address the topic of mental health head on. When it's something that we struggle with personally, it can be difficult to put ourselves in the position of reaching for others when we're just trying to heal ourselves. But, when I took an informal poll when I was just getting ready to start a podcast, I reached out to my own social networks and said, hey, here's a list of things that I think I might want to talk about. What do you want to hear about? And mental health was far and away the number one area of interest. We all are touched by it in one way or another. So good for you for taking a big bite out of that apple.
thank you. Thank you. It does take a lot. Thank you for that. It takes a lot of bravery, I will say, to get on and say like, hey, I'm a little bit crazy. Here's how, because it's, you never know what kind of reaction you're going to get, especially for me. Like I do comedy too. So I'm in the public eye to begin with. So to take that step and say, guess what? It's not all fun and games all the time. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. Here's the dark parts. You need to see this too. That
Yeah.
was like my big power move right there. Cause like I was always that bubbly, happy, super excitable, nothing's ever wrong kind of girl. And I do still have that energy, but it wasn't always authentic or genuine. Sometimes it was just like because I had to. Now I don't feel like I have to anymore because I can come on and say, guess what? I'm feeling mentally ill today. Let's address it. I
Yeah.
love being able to do that. But mental health really is not talked about enough. I do see a lot of podcasts and stuff and people popping up talking about it more, and I love to see it. But unfortunately, with that, and I'm sure you can agree, there's a lot of misinformation rolling around the mental health world, just because people don't know enough to say like that's not accurate. Unfortunately, that's
Yeah.
that's the problem we're going to face too moving forward as it gets more mainstream to talk about.
Yeah, in this day of social media, when everybody has a platform, and fact checking isn't even something you can rely on, depending on who's doing the checking, it can be
Exactly.
very confusing. It can be very confusing. So I hear that for sure. I really would. If I never see another YouTube video about somebody who wants to show me all their altars, it will be too soon because I just feel like, popularizing and making mental illness trendy
Yeah, that's
is not really doing a good service. So yeah, that was just my little judgment call.
and you know what? I'm with you because I do see a lot of it. For me, it's not really YouTube. I see it on TikTok,
Mhm.
making jokes about mental illnesses. And at the same time, like I make jokes about my mental illness from time to time, but I'm making fun of myself.
Right.
These are people that are making joking videos that don't even have a mental illness, that are literally just using it because it's trendy or because they know they'll get a lot of views out of it. And it's not always necessarily proper, appropriate, or right morally to do so. That kind of
Yeah.
drives me nuts. But I see it mostly on
I'm all in
TikTok. I've
favor of free
noticed.
speech and, First Amendment and all of that. But at the same time, I do think that if we're going to put ourselves in a position of, when you have a platform like this, you sort of position yourself as an expert in your field, kind of unofficially. And I think there's a
Right.
responsibility that goes along with that personally.
I agree. I'm glad you said it. I absolutely agree.
Mm-hmm.
It is a responsibility because it's if you're going to take on the position to where you're speaking out and publicizing and talking about your experience with it, number one, it has to be correct. Like you can't just make stuff up or embellish things. You have to tell them as they are and as it is. Because if you're, fantasizing it and making it overly pleasurable to hear about, it kind of defeats the purpose of educating about the mental health condition in
Yeah,
the first place.
I
So,
agree. Yep.
so let's now that we kind of went through that, let's get into boundaries. So I know you like to educate about boundaries. What kind of drove you to do that so passionately?
Well, since I mentioned a little while ago that I'm the queen of personal reinvention, before I was doing podcasting and before I was doing YouTube and before I was doing art for a living, I was a life coach. And I happened to specialize in two areas. One of them was grief recovery, and the other was boundaries. And there's a famous book called Boundaries. It's by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend, and it is the definitive work on the subject. And it was a book that I taught in a number of different areas in my community for several years. So I know this book inside out and have had people in my life say that they never wanted me to use the B word again because I was always trying to educate people about it, because I think the concepts that are covered in the book they just have so much to offer in terms to how to improve our quality of life and the way we interact with each other in a healthy way. And so many of us are broken in that area for a lot of reasons. So there's a lot of wisdom in this book. There are principles that I still use in my daily life today. And it's a subject that I just love to talk about.
Yeah, it's something I like to talk about it, but unfortunately, it's not as pleasurable to actually put them out, right? When you're telling people about your boundaries, that's like the non-fun part, because then it's usually a fight. For the wrong people, it's usually a fight.
It's true, and it's because of that brokenness that I was talking about. The thing about boundaries is we set them and we communicate them, and then we complain that other people don't respect them. And so we think that somehow we've failed. I made my boundaries clear, and this person is trampling all over them. So what did I do wrong? And the answer is you didn't enforce the boundary that you set. So the important thing to know there is that when you set a boundary and you clearly communicate that, one of the keys to knowing that you're being successful in boundary setting is that you're pissing people off. So, because they're not used to, they think they know where your buttons are. They think they know how to get around you and how to get what they want out of you. And when they come up against a boundary, which is a no, basically, it's a way of saying, this is a limit beyond which I'm unwilling to go. And if someone's encountering that for the first time, your button moved, it's in a different place now. It causes a reaction that's not always positive. And we need to learn that that's actually a key, that we're getting it right. And at first, we're going to feel guilty about it. That's another key. If you feel guilty about your boundary, that's another way that you can know that's actually a positive signal. And if you stick with it long enough, one day you're going to find that you're not just celebrating those guilty feelings, you're actually celebrating the fact that you don't feel guilty anymore. You've matured in your boundary setting. And, something else I want to add is that a boundary, a lot of us say, I set a boundary, I put up a wall, I've just walled myself in and I'm just not letting anything in. But a boundary, a healthy boundary, is really more of a gate. And we picture ourselves like opening our gate to let the good stuff in and closing the gate to keep the bad stuff out. So it's just like, you got your own cattle ranch in Wyoming or something, and you don't want your livestock to get out. So you're going to close that gate and hold all the good stuff on your property. But you're also going to keep the wolves and the bears and the predators out. But you're going to open it up on a day when you want them all to go out in the pasture and have some wonderful grass to eat or something like that. And so often we do exactly the opposite. We close our gates to good things and we open them up to bad things. And so it starts with us really being able to evaluate what is good for us and what isn't good for us. And how do I know when to open my gate and when to close it? Let our yes be yes and our no be no, and not be confused about that in ourselves. Then we can set a boundary for other people to respect.
And you know what? That is absolutely factual. I agree 100%,
Mm-hmm.
especially with the gate as opposed to a wall. People see boundaries as a threat, but the only people who see them as a threat are the people who take advantage of the fact that you don't have boundaries. And I love the people when you do set those boundaries and you're standing up for yourself and you're holding firm to them, to think that there's some kind of exception to the rule for them. There's no exceptions to boundaries, like for anybody. That's why they're being set, because there have been too many exceptions,
Mm-hmm.
to the point where it's toxic for you now to not have them. So you have to set those guidelines, let's say, or those boundaries for other people to protect your own peace. Um, Anybody who sees, like I said, a boundary as a threat is usually the people who try to take advantage. So I just want to
Yeah,
make
and
sure I
and
add
so
that in
often
too.
we learn these toxic habits all the way back when we're little kids. So
Yep.
not respecting other people's boundaries can actually be something we learn from our own parents when we're little kids.
Mm-hmm.
And the aunt that is always sweating. And so you don't want to hug her when she comes over. And mom is going, oh, go give Aunt Betty a hug. Just go give her a kiss. And you don't want to. And you're trying
And
to
they
set a
kiss on the
little baby
lips.
boundary. Yeah, a little baby boundary. And mom's pushing you in that direction. She thinks she's helping you to socialize when in fact what she's doing is trampling on your boundary and you don't know it yet. And so we grow up thinking other people get to impose on us their
Mm-hmm.
idea of what they think is healthy for us and good for us. And we kind of can't help that when we're young. But then when we grow up, let's say we grow up and we're taught we need to be loving people, we need to be kind people, cooperative people. We're taught all these principles, and we think that every time we say no, we're actually being unloving. And what we're actually doing is we're not expressing, I just love too much. I love too much because I can't say no to anybody and I'm exhausted. And well, if you're exhausted, if the fruit of that behavior is exhaustion, then can that really be love? Or are you actually responding out of fear? Fear that you will lose that person's attention or friendship or love. So you're not actually operating in love, you're operating in fear, and you're setting a fear-based, or you're failing to set a boundary out of fear, when actually loving somebody is to show them exactly how to have the most healthy relationship with you. A no can be the most loving thing that you can do because it helps that person know where they can step, where they can't. And when someone learns to accept that and respect that, now you're working with a very healthy interpersonal relationship.
That's very, very, very true. I agree 100%. And even to add more on to that, I actually want to say this too, that a lot of the time it's a trauma response for us to overly please. And it does stem, like you said, from our childhood, from our parents. Get over here and talk to your grandfather on the phone. A no is not okay. Now, to be fair, when it comes to grandparents, we really shouldn't say no to saying hi to our grandparents. But at the same time, our parents never respected those baby boundaries. So now we don't even respect those baby boundaries for ourselves. We don't want to set those because, like you said, by setting those boundaries, we're now showing those people we don't love them. When in reality, what we're actually showing them is we love ourselves by setting these boundaries, by protecting our peace. And especially with family, come give your aunt a hug, or the kissing on the lips. That was always a big thing for me. Like that. I'm not going to give my personal opinion on the subject, but it should be okay for your child to say no. for any kind of social situation, to be a part or to not be a part. If I'm having people over and my son does not want to come out and say hi, my son does not have to. He is allowed to set those boundaries for himself and protect his peace, because I want my child to have more than I did, which is the right
Yeah,
to
and certainly
choose.
when we're
You know?
children, there are certain things that our parents are going to encourage us to do. We definitely have to respect that they are older and wiser. Their job is to prepare us for the next stage of life. So there has to be some moments when mother knows best or father knows best in a healthy situation. But part of that needs to be the parent's responsibility of knowing when it's okay to let that child express their own desire and set the boundary, and to teach them early on that there are moments when mom is going to encourage you in a certain direction, but then, in other situations, it's going to be okay for you to have an opinion of your own. And when we are adults and start practicing healthy boundary setting, what we find happens to us once you start setting your boundaries and then you get some positive feedback from that. We might get some pushback at first, but then people are going to go, oh, okay, now I know what this landscape looks like. We will find ourselves being drawn to other people who are boundary lovers. So we're going to shift, we're going to change as well in terms of the kinds of people we want to surround ourselves with, because we're going to crave that healthy interaction. And we also want to learn the difference. Here's a very important key: learning the difference between hurt and harm. So, in the book, the example that the authors give is if you say to your 12-year-old, you need to go to the dentist. I don't want to go to the dentist. If I go to the dentist is going to hurt me. That might be true. So if I set a boundary and me saying no to you might hurt you, it might hurt your feelings. The question then becomes, listen, we know going to the dentist actually is good for us, and it might hurt a little bit, but is it going to harm you? No, you're not going to be harmed by the dentist. I'm not going to tell you it won't hurt. It could hurt to have a tooth extracted or to have a root canal or something like that. But ultimately, this is for your good. And to learn the difference between hurt and harm, if we fail to set a boundary because we don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, we have to understand if the reason we set that boundary is because that person is doing something, behaving in a way that's not healthy for us telling them no, us saying, look, when you choose that behavior, you are also choosing the consequences of that behavior. You chose both of those things. So if you're going to act that way, and I'm going to say, you know what? No, you're actually loving that person in that moment by helping them know this is not acceptable. They're understanding the law of sowing and reaping. If I sow this behavior, then the fruit I'm going to get is a big fat no. But if I keep letting this happen and I keep rewarding bad behavior, that we're denying that person the opportunity to learn from it and to grow. We're taking away the natural progression of learning what happens when we fall down. We're going to scrape our knee. I'm going to bleed. Okay, now I need to know I need to step more carefully. So we're actually helping other people in addition to ourselves when we set those good boundaries.
That's very true. That's very true. And I feel like the people who have the hardest time setting those boundaries are kind of the children who uh, didn't really have a voice growing up at all. The invalidated, the unheard. Because our parents always tell us, like, sit down and be quiet, or do as I say and not as I do, which, of course, as you know, we all did the opposite. We did exactly as they did and not what they said at all. So, because we are led by example. And unfortunately, when we don't have that example, it makes us feel guiltier that we're doing something that's taboo or wrong by setting those boundaries or standing up for ourselves once we do. So I think it's mostly those invalidated, unheard children, because you see in, let's say, healthy households, people grew up who, let's say, just grew up in with standard healthy household, open communication, all that, when they got to set their boundaries or say no to things, and that was okay. Some of us didn't have that opportunity, but there are the ones that have it. They're easily going into situations saying, I'm not okay with this. Boom, boundary set. Bang, like the sound effect. I don't have a sound effect maker, but you get what I'm saying. Boom, final. It's there. There's no question, no doubt in their mind. Nobody even questions it, because they're so confident in setting that boundary. And then you have, the other people who try to say no to something, and something negative happened, like a negative, whether it be discipline or negative feedback from a parent or a guardian growing up. Now you're like traumatized when you try to. It's more like a clang instead of a bang, and then you're
Yeah.
kind of like after. When you
Yeah.
throw a swing and you kind of duck after so it doesn't hit you, it's kind of like doing that when you're setting the boundaries. When you grow up in that kind of household or that kind of environment, it's moving away from that work.
Certainly people who grew up, their family of origin had an environment like that, they're no doubt going to struggle with boundaries. I would add to that those of us who even grew up in the healthiest of settings can also struggle with it once we leave the nest and we start experiencing the world and meeting different kinds of people. Let's say, for instance, I grew up in a fairly idyllic family life. It was very sitcom-y and very normal and very safe. And when I got to my first year in college, up until college, everything about my life was predictable. There were no rude surprises. I grew up with the same kids that I played with. Then I left that environment, moved out of my house for the first time, got some roommates, went to college, met a whole different population of people. And I started encountering behaviors, philosophies, frames of mind, all kinds of stuff I'd never been exposed to before. And in some ways, I wasn't prepared for that. So even though I was raised in a healthy way, I'm encountering these things that are confusing to me, and I'm applying the same behaviors. So the permissiveness and the acceptance and the tolerance of bad behaviors, because I felt it was the loving thing to do because I didn't have a need for boundaries with my familiar set. But now I'm in a new environment and I had to learn from scratch at 18, 19 years old. Oh, you know what? I don't think I want to open the gate for that one. And sometimes it took leaving the gate open and having a couple of wolves coming in before you realize the necessity for a boundary. And in a way, it's a rite of passage. And some of us learn that lesson young. Some of us don't. Some of us learn it in certain areas of our lives and not in others. But there are principles. There's a system for following how to set healthy boundaries, how to know when you're successful, how to know when to push back, and how to know when not to close your gate to good things. Sometimes we think setting a boundary means just shutting everybody out and everything out. And that can also be a trauma response. I don't trust men because one man mistreated me. Okay. So
I'm just kidding. I've
that's
been
a
there.
thing.
I've been there.
That's a thing. But logic would tell us that not every single person with a penis walking the planet is a danger. It could feel that way, but it's probably not true. And learning how to navigate that for our own well-being, for our own wholeness, is worth pursuing, in my view. The goal is happiness that comes out of health. Not just happiness by living in a fantasy world, but happiness in knowing that we're at peace with ourselves, we've worked out our issues, and we're able to move through the world, not in a constant state of trauma response. And some of us never get there. Some of us struggle with it. Some of us seem to excel at it. I would say we want to look under the covers because I'm not so sure any of us really get it perfect.
At all. And I like what you said there too about it's still about the gate. I love the reference and picturing it as a gate when you set these boundaries because it's not a wall. You're not blocking
No.
everyone out. What you're doing is giving yourself the opportunity to filter who's coming in and out of that gate.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of gets it so that let's say you have a sifter and you're looking for big pieces of diamond. You're getting rid of all the stuff that's unnecessary so you can really look at what you need to find those big pieces of diamond. So it's kind of like mining for gold or diamonds in that way.
Yeah. And with a gate, if you have that ranch scenario, you can see them coming like miles away.
That's right.
You can actually fire a warning shot over the bow before they even get to your gate and let them know, I wouldn't come any closer if I were you. Or you can ring the dinner bell and throw open the gate and say, hey, I just made some soup. Come on in.
That's true. And I mean, by even just having those boundaries, it gives people less of an inkling that want to cause negative and that have negative intent or have negative implications for you because they see that and they're like, forget it. That's too much work. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Mhm.
Keep it going. Keep it moving. You know,
Yeah.
you
The
don't even have
greatest
to
lesson
filter.
that we can teach anybody else is what I said earlier. When you choose the behavior, you are also choosing the consequences. You can go ahead and be a jerk, but if you were a jerk, I want you to know you also chose to be eradicated from my life, or to have a restraining order placed against you, or, to not be in a relationship with me, or I'm not going to work at this job anymore if it's a professional thing. They will only learn those lessons through boundary setting. If you don't set that boundary and you allow those behaviors to continue, you're not only doing yourself a disservice, you're robbing that person of the opportunity to understand what they sow, they will reap. You've taken that away, so growth becomes impossible for them.
That's very true. It's very true. So moving on, now that we've talked about kind of like establishing and the background on boundaries, or anything else that you want to add that people should know if they're really going to start getting into setting that boundary? You know, a lot of people, they see these videos and they get real inspired and motivated. Is there like a word of caution or anything that you think that they should do first before just jumping right on into it?
Yeah, I really think it's important to understand the principles of healthy boundary setting. And that's what we've been talking about. The difference between the wall and the gate, the difference between hurt and harm, the difference between love and fear. And a great place to start is the book that I learned from. And whenever we talk about boundaries, we can't talk about it without that definitive work. And so if you look up that book, and it is simply called Boundaries, and it's Dr. John Townsend and Dr. Henry Cloud, it is an absolutely perfect place to start. Read it. It's an easy read. And each chapter will tell you easily, do this, don't do that. This is how you know you're succeeding. This is how you know you need work. This is how you can even identify a place where you need a boundary that you may not have even known. So flying by the seat of your pants could backfire if you don't understand the basic principles of healthy boundary setting. I would recommend, getting your information from the horse's mouth.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I definitely always recommend people read a book on something, anything. Like, I always just recommend people read a book. So I'm with that too. I'd say too, to add to that, that it's important to understand why you want to set a boundary in the first place. Why do you feel you need the boundary? Because when you get to the root of the problem, it makes it easier to find the solution. So that's just something I wanted to add too. Because
That's
for
good.
me, it was like, I'm not just going to watch this video and say, yeah, let's go set some boundaries. I'm going to say, you know what? Maybe if I'd started setting a boundary in this scenario, it might have gone a little different. I start thinking about the problems where this could possibly benefit my life by having it, you know, like a dating life or in your family. You know, if I cut this portion or put a boundary right here and don't allow that behavior from them no more, this will make me a lot happier. You know, you start to look at the cause and effect of things. We can't just go setting boundaries down like throwing sticky notes on a piece of paper. You know, you have to put them strategically and for a reason. It's not just to throw things out
Absolutely.
there, you know.
Yes.
So I think that was
Couldn't agree
important
more.
too.
Yeah. Have you read this book?
No, I actually, everything I've learned as far as setting boundaries has been because I've been forced to. And I mean, it's an unfortunate situation, but I guess the best teacher is life. So as far as me, I'm still working on enforcing those boundaries. Don't get me wrong. I'm still a work in progress. So I definitely still need to consult the book for the follow up. Setting the boundaries is one thing. It's just
Yeah.
really holding firm to that, especially when it comes to like you said, people you love. You feel guilty, you know, by protecting your peace or, you know, personal space or privacy in that way. Especially for me, my child is where I struggle with the boundaries,
Sure.
you know.
That's a
um
tough one. Mhm.
it is, and he is. So um, but you know, I have to, you know, really fine tune that because I want to show him that this is important to not only set boundaries but also keep them and be firm on them, because I want him to be the same way as he goes into his adult life and pretty soon preteen and teenage life, because he's getting close to that age. So this is like a really important time for me to kind of tune it up, hone it in, and perfect it myself so that I can lead him by example.
Take him to the dentist when he's 12.
Yeah, well, he goes to the dentist now, and if I got to pull you kicking and screaming, you're going. So, because if
Mhm.
I got to go, you're going too.
He might hurt you, but he won't harm you.
That's right. That's absolutely right. It's the same thing I tell him about getting on the school bus to go to school.
Mhm.
It doesn't hurt. It doesn't harm you to get up early. It might hurt your sleep schedule, might make you feel a little crabby, but it's not going to harm you. So get up. There's more harm in you staying home and not going to school and getting an education than, you actually getting up early and going.
That's right.
So with that being said, is there anything that you wanted to add before we kind of finish this off?
I would love to invite anybody who's interested to find my podcast, which is called Cool Gray in Studio A. I just finished up a series called Creativity Born of Trauma. So it's interesting how we can take our most difficult experiences and turn them into something beautiful and shareable with the rest of the world. And coming up next year, we have a second series on personal paranormal encounters, just in case anybody thought they knew what my podcast was about. So I'm full of surprises. I welcome the additional listeners, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that.
Yeah, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise in the world of boundaries. Because, like I said, I'm still a work in progress on it. So
we all
I'm
are.
happy.
Our journey's never finished.
It really never is. It never is. I consider myself top tier, but it's not the most top tier. There's always improvement. So with that being said, thank you so much again. And I'm sure we'll be coming together soon for something else in the works. I'm sure you have a lot more to teach the world, and I'm happy to give you the platform to do it. So, and I will be checking out those podcasts. So
I appreciate that very much. Thanks, Christy. And it's been a pleasure.
All right. And I'll see you on the next one.
Great.
So I'm going to end this here.